everybody to the Parahan Show. This is Parahan, your hostess with the mostest, the creepiest dude in town. Let's get talking to paranormal. So, a lot of people ask me questions all the time, and I feel like it would be a good opportunity to do kind of a Q&A with you guys and answer some questions about the paranormal. So, I'm going to do a few questions that I think a lot of people have asked over the years and kind of elaborate on those. First question: why is it that places like schools and libraries tend to be haunted? Well, there's a couple determining factors in that. You see, a lot of these places are in very old structures. There's a lot of history surrounding these places, and you have a lot of energy that's passed through there, a lot of memories that are kind of trapped in these buildings and events that have taken place in these structures. So one of the reasons these places are so haunted is because some of them are over 100 years old and they've seen a lot of history. They've had a lot of occurrences of negative or good things happen there. And they've seen a lot of different types of energies pass through. The second reason is that a lot of these places tend to be built out of brick structures. And what we know about stones is they tend to retain energy. They tend to be conduits of specific type of energies that are present with these materializations of spirits. So being that these places are built out of bricks or stones, they sort of retain the energy and keep it trapped inside of this structure. The third thing is that you have a lot of people that experience intense emotions there. If you think about school, a lot of students are scared, nervous, under a lot of stress, and so are the teachers. There's sometimes fights, there's bullies, there's a lot of energy that happens there in this space. And the same thing with libraries. You get a lot of people that come in there that are doing research, that are doing work, that are doing schoolwork, that potentially could be losing their home and trying to figure out ways to save it. And so you get a lot of different types of energies that come in this space, and that seems to get trapped within there. The other thing is that you see often that librarians tend to be associated with a lot of these hauntings at libraries. And usually if you go to a library and they have a ghost story, it's probably about a librarian. We see librarians, a lot of them take their job very serious. They're very meticulous and precise. They like to go above and beyond for their job. And so there's this strong attachment to that building and to that job specifically that makes them want to stay around after they passed on, to continue to see that order is kept in the library, that the books are put in the right place, that people are following the rules. So that, I hope that answers that question for you guys. Another question that I get quite often is, why are ghosts always depicted as this thing that looks like a sheet, basically with eyes? Well, you see, that goes back to ancient times when they used to bury the dead. They would put them and wrap them in a burial shroud. And so they believed that if this person came back from the dead, essentially it would be wearing what it had on when it was buried, which would be this white burial shroud. Hence the image of a classic ghost that we have, this sheet walking around with eyes. And that's where we get this unanimous picture that is associated with ghosts and that you often think of, and also in Pac-Man. Next question: do you believe that all these UFO sightings are tied to extraterrestrials from another galaxy visiting Earth? Well, let me tell you something about space travel. It's very complicated, very complex, and also very dangerous. And one of the problems I have with these UFOs being extraterrestrials from another galaxy and they are visiting Earth is that it would be very hard for them to traverse here. You see, it's very hard for us to travel through space, even with our advanced technology. There are a lot of complicated factors. You see, space isn't linear like we often think or like is depicted in the movies. It's not straight forwards and backwards. It's actually curved. If you're familiar with Einstein's theory of relativity, then you understand that the mass of an object, its gravity affects that space and time around that area. And so there's a lot of warped space-time around the universe, and this creates problems like time dilation, you know, and you have to compensate for that, and that makes space travel very, very difficult. So the idea that these, even if these were advanced beings that were traveling from another part of the universe, could go light years, make it here to our planet, and come back without experiencing time dilation or difficulties in space or the dangers of traveling such great distances, then who else could it be? I think that it's possible these UFOs could be either A, interdimensional beings who are traveling here from another dimension, or B, they could be possibly time travelers from the Earth, but in the future, and that society has advanced to the point where they could actually travel through time and space, and that perhaps extraterrestrials are the next step of evolution, and that maybe they're humans that have evolved into a higher species, or potentially some other form of wildlife here on the Earth that has advanced forward in development through evolution. So I don't think specifically these could be, interplanetary beings, but more so maybe interdimensional beings or time travelers, because in order to travel through space, they would have to travel through time, and they would experience time dilation. So they would have to figure out time travel essentially to travel across the universe. And they would have to understand how they could potentially go to visit a place and then come back, and a million years hadn't passed. So they would have to discover how gravity works and how gravity's effect on time and space, and understand these components before they could essentially travel here to Earth. So it's very much possible these could be time travelers. All right. Next question. Why do ghosts often appear in orbs? Well, you see, think of it this way. A ghost has limited options on how it can appear or manifest. You see, it needs energy to make itself appear. And sometimes it's trying to get our attention. And the only way to do so is by using the energy that surrounds it. And if it doesn't have enough energy to fully materialize into an apparition, then it appears in things such as sounds, noises, orbs, because these orbs are smaller shaped balls of light that would be easier for them to materialize into, and an easier form for them to take to try and communicate with us. So that basically they're trapped in this other dimension in a sense, and we can't see them, we can't hear them. The only way they can communicate with us is if they get enough energy to appear, but sometimes they only have enough energy to appear in the form of a sound or a orb, because this requires less energy. And often you see these materializations of these transparent apparitions during the time of like thunderstorms, for instance, because there's a lot of energy present during that time for them to feed off of. So that is why we often see orbs more so than a full physical manifestation of an apparition. But, and then one other question that I get all the time is, why haven't we found significant evidence to suggest that Bigfoot exists? Well, here's the thing. You have to think of Bigfoot as more than just what has been depicted in the media and movies and things like that. You see, I don't think Bigfoot is this unintelligent being that he's often presented as. If you think about this, if this is some sort of hybrid between a human and an ape, then it is very possible it has the intelligence of a human. It has the ability to construct and build, to solve problems, and to evade. And then it also has the ability of an ape where it can climb. It's very athletic. It's very strong. So you have the perfect being here that is strong, that is very athletic, and also very intelligent. So I think that when we go out in the woods and we're searching for Bigfoot, he already knows of our presence before we even reach him. They know that we're coming. They know we're looking for them. They know when you're setting up cameras and you're setting up, things to capture them. And basically, I think they're intelligent enough that they can understand that interactions with humans would be very dangerous, would cause them a great deal of problems. So they avoid us. And when they see us in the area setting up cameras and trying to capture them, they evade and hide, and they're very good at doing so. And perhaps, we often think of Bigfoot as walking upright, which is true, which is how we've often seen him. But think about it. If he is an ape, then he must have the ability to climb, right? As we know that apes do. And he potentially could be swinging through the trees, climbing through the trees, and we wouldn't even notice him. So he has this extra element to be able to hide up in the trees and basically move through the trees where we couldn't even see him on the ground at ground level. And he could potentially be hiding in trees and watching us as we walk by. So he hears us in the distance, and perhaps he has very good hearing. He has heightened senses, and so he knows when we're coming. He hears us, climbs up the tree, and is hiding in a tree. And we don't think to look up because we think of Bigfoot as walking on the ground, right? So potentially, Bigfoot could be hiding in the trees. He could know that when we're coming, that it would be best for him to hide and evade us. And I think also there's an intelligence there that they understand that they cannot leave any evidence of themselves behind, because that would lead to them being hunted. And I think that they do a good job of it. And it's possible that they even bury their dead. They conceal their dead. They conceal any evidence to suggest that they were even there. Because this protects them. And I think we have to look at Bigfoot as more than just a dumb ape, but an actual intellectual being that has the ability to learn, to decipher, to understand that humans are bad. So I think that's potentially why we found little to no evidence of Bigfoot's existence except through possibly photographs or videos, because we caught them off guard. But I think that they're very good at eluding us and evading us. And I don't know how easy it would be for one to be potentially captured or interacted with unless it wanted to interact with you. So those are just a couple questions that I get on a regular basis. If you guys have some questions you'd like answered, feel free to comment, and next time I do a segment, I will do a Q&A, and I will answer some of your guys' questions. Next thing I wanted to talk about, and I've noticed this, and I've heard other people talking about this, but I don't think it's gotten enough attention. I've noticed that we're seeing these sort of like paranormal documents and evidence disappearing. The number one thing I see is that it feels like it's very harder to obtain books on things like Bigfoot, extraterrestrials, ghosts. It seems like these books are disappearing off the shelves, and I've noticed this in libraries and bookstores, even online. It's very hard to get a hold of this material, and some of these famous books that were popularized back in the day are very hard to find. And when you're looking at cases of, say, for instance, extraterrestrials. And I'll give you an example. There's this guy called the Paranormal Pastor, and he is in Erie, Pennsylvania. And he was looking into the Presque Isle encounter, in which several teenagers had an encounter with a UFO, and then they had car trouble and were stuck there in Presque Isle. And a couple of the men went to go get help, and this Bigfoot-like creature attacked their vehicle, and then they seen it run off, and then essentially this UFO take off. And it was investigated by law enforcement, by the Air Force, by a bunch of different people, and there was all this documentation, newspaper clippings, it was in the media. And this Paranormal Pastor guy, he was trying to discover the real story and get information, but he found it hard to find microfilm, newspapers, anything associated with this case. And even the guy himself said that he had seen that, like, a lot of the evidence he had, the guy that was with the group of teenagers, one of the guys in that group, said that he had tried to compile some evidence that he had kept, and sort of that was taken from him, and he had a hard time getting that back, and it said the files were destroyed, or pictures were destroyed, and newspaper clippings, things like that, they seem to be disappearing. And we're seeing this with all kinds of cases of UFOs or Bigfoot, is that all this evidence, all these newspaper articles, and I've tried myself to look up for archived footage of newscast of these incidents, of newspapers, things like that, and I can't find them anymore. I used to be able to find them really easy, and you had access to it. Now it's gotten really hard, and they say these files don't exist, or they've been damaged. You can't find microfilm. It seems like that they are slowly erasing the existence of the paranormal, and that they don't want people to know about extraterrestrials and Bigfoot and ghosts, because perhaps there's some sort of connection and there's some element there that we're not supposed to know about. But we're seeing an alarming rate of things disappearing that are associated with the paranormal, books, evidence, things like that, and old videos, old interviews. We cannot find that anymore. And we have to wonder, why are they hiding this stuff, and why now? Is it because more people are interested in Bigfoot, extraterrestrials, UFOs, things like that? You know, are they afraid we're going to start looking into it more and break these cases open and find new evidence, or find something that was missed in the old evidence? I don't know, but I think it's definitely interesting. So last night, my family and I were telling some stories, and it brought up this story. I brought up this story. So last night, my family and I were telling some stories, and I brought up this story from the past that I thought was really awesome, and I wanted to share with you guys because it really made me think about some things. You see, when I was younger, I used to go to this summer camp, and it was at Lake Carlinville, and you basically would go with a bunch of groups from different areas around the state. There was over 1,000 kids there, and they had a lake, and they had hiking trails and archery and all kinds of different things that you would expect at a camp. And at night, you would hike this big trail, and we'd walk out to this place called Powwow Hill, where there were sort of these wooden bleachers and an outdoor auditorium, and we would sing songs and we'd hear people talk. But I remember that when we would walk there, there was always these stories of these gorilla creatures that roamed the woods. And everybody talked about it, and they said that apparently there had been a circus train that had went to the area, it derailed and crashed, and these gorillas escaped and now inhabited this area. And everybody talked about it, and it was like we would scare one another with these stories. at the time, I used to think that this was just a story we would scare the newcomers with and that we would tell one another. But then I got to thinking about it, and it was really weird because at night when we would hike the trail and we'd walk to Powwow Hill, you could hear sounds in the woods, and you could hear like something big walking around, and you would hear like howling and these weird, strange sounds. And everybody would just say, oh, it's the gorillas and stuff, and we joke about it. But thinking about it, it was really unusual that no one ever talked about it, because you heard these sounds, you experienced it, but we almost kind of ignored it and didn't think much about it. And I remember that this was a regular occurrence, that we would hear these things and see these things, and we dismissed them as gorillas in the woods. So one time, one camp season, we were there, and my friend had one of those little 8mm video cameras. And we all decided, hey, we should sneak out tonight and walk up to the Powwow Hill and hike there and just videotape stuff. And everybody's like, yeah, that's a cool idea. So he grabs his video camera, we all leave the campsite, we start hiking this trail. The whole time he's recording us on his video camera. We get to Powwow Hill and we're sitting there kind of joking around and recording stuff, when all of a sudden we hear a loud crashing sound, like something is moving through the woods and breaking branches and disturbing the ground, and you could hear it like a loud swooshing sound, like something big was moving through the woods. And all of a sudden we heard it in one direction and we heard it in another direction, and it was on the other side of us. And then we heard it like it was in front of us as well, and like there was multiple things in the woods circling us and walking around. All of a sudden my friend says, look over there. And through the woods, peering at us, were these two big yellow glowing eyes. At first we seen it over here in this one direction, and then we see another set of eyes appear over here, and then another set of eyes over here. And these things, whatever they were staring at us and looking at us through the woods. At first, we were just kind of shocked and like, what is this? What's going on? But then it set in like what was actually happening. And we knew like we need to get out of here. So we're like, okay guys, it's time to go. We got to get back to camp. So we all leave and run down the trail and go as fast as we can back to camp. And when we get back to camp, we're like, hey, were you filming that on the camcorder? And he's like, yeah, I got the eyes and everything on the camcorder. So we're like, let's review the footage. And when we reviewed the footage, we noticed that there were eyes and things moving through the woods as we were walking to the spot. So basically these things were following us all the way there and stalking us. And that kind of gave us like goosebumps and chills out, and we were freaked out after that, and it made us a little more nervous to walk through the woods. And what's funny, as I got older and I started to think about it, I was like, is it possible that these are Bigfoot creatures, right? Maybe Bigfoot inhabits this area, and we can and kids around the area seen this, and they thought, hey, these are gorillas, and they came up with this story of gorillas escaping from a circus train, and this became that legend. But really these were Bigfoot-like creatures, and we didn't understand what it was at that time, and we just called them gorillas in the woods. And it made me think about how many people experience something when they're younger and they dismiss it as something else. I've heard of people saying they had imaginary friends when they were kids. And then when they really think about it, it's kind of strange that I would talk to this thing and it would play with me and I would see it. And I remember physically seeing it. It was this person or, this weird looking thing. Is it possible that those were ghosts or extraterrestrials or people, remember, wait, when I was younger, there used to be these like green looking animals in my room. And I used to play with them and I thought it was fun. And then you start to think about it like, wait a minute, maybe that was extraterrestrials. And it's crazy when you think about that, when you go back to your childhood and you remember some of the events and you kind of dismissed them as playful, fun things. But when you really think about it, was I legitimately encountering something paranormal and I just didn't realize that, you know? I knew someone that said that when they remember when they were a child, that their parents used to say that they would talk and communicate with this animal they had, this stuffed animal toy that they had. And when they started to recall it, they remember like, well, you know, I don't think I was talking to the stuffed animal. I was talking to someone else. And then it brought about these events that made them think, well, maybe it was actually something supernatural. And I just didn't realize it at the time and I dismissed it. And I think when you go back to your childhood and you recall these events, you sometimes remember these things as differently. You know, there's several experiences that I had when I was younger and I didn't think much of them until when I got older, you know, like encounters with the ghosts. I didn't know what they were and I didn't know how to explain them. I didn't know they were ghosts until I started studying and I realized these were ghosts that I was experiencing, you know. And I think that that's the creepiest thing sometimes is we forget about these stories and they kind of get placed in the back of our minds because we dismiss them as something natural. And I think that's just in our human nature to dismiss things, you know. Another story that I remembered is in a similar encounter, I think with possibly a Bigfoot-like creature. My cousins and I were playing next to my grandmother's house in this wash, which is, for people that haven't been to the Southwest, these are like creeks that have dried up. And we're playing in this wash, which is pretty thick, desert, as well as, you know, there's a lot of trees and brush and things like that, and it's easy to get lost in. So we were like just playing around, and I remember one of my cousins points out and says, "Hey, dude, what is that over there? Look over there." And we all look that way, and standing behind this tree is this big, tall, hairy looking creature that kind of looked like a bear, but was standing upright. And we knew the wildlife in the area, and we knew there was no bears in this area, and that no one had ever seen a bear there. And it was too big to be the kind of bears that were even remotely close to the area, like a black bear. This thing stood about like 8 to 9 feet tall next to the tree because it was past the taller branch, one of the taller branches on the trees. And so all of a sudden, us being adventurous kids, we decided to approach it and we started going close to it. And all of a sudden, this thing just sort of looked at us and then turned and then took off through the wash, down the wash in the opposite direction of us. And we started running after it and chasing it. And we went as fast as we could. And this thing, you know, just made it out of the wash and disappeared off into the distance. We looked around for a while, we couldn't find it. And we went over by the tree, and I remember standing on top of my cousin's shoulder, and we were both, you know, like 4 feet, 4'6" at the time. And, you know, I still couldn't touch the branch where this thing was standing. I mean, so this had to be really, really tall. And all my cousins, we still talk about it to this day, that we had this encounter. And it's kind of interesting when you think back about it, because I really do think that was an encounter with a Bigfoot. And later on, I did some research and looked in the area, and there had been several possible Bigfoot sightings in the area with the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Research Organization. And it was interesting to find that. And then another story that I kind of remember that I thought was interesting is that several years ago, about like 3 or 4 years ago, my friend and a couple of my friends and I were at the gym working out, and his girlfriend and her friends were back at their apartment, and we were all hanging out with them prior to working out. So we were working out at the gym, and about an hour and a half in, my friend gets a phone call, and it's these girls, his girlfriend and the girls, and they're all hysteric, and they said, "We need you to come home right away. there's stuff going crazy in the house. Lights are flickering, doors are slamming. You know, everything's going nuts in this house, and you could hear them screaming and like freaking out. And so we're like, okay, we'll meet you. And they're going, we're going to leave the house. Meet us at this nearby restaurant. We're going to stay in the parking lot. We don't want to be at the house anymore. So they left the house, went to this restaurant, and we go and we meet him back. And as we're leaving there, I was talking to my friend, and he was saying about how they were playing around with the Ouija board, and that, you know, that they didn't think anything of it, but maybe this was somehow attributed to it. And we're like, yeah, no, that, you know, that probably wasn't the best idea, right? So we get to the restaurant where the girls are, and they tell us, you know, we don't want to go back to the house. You guys need to go there and check it out. So we're like, okay, we'll go to the apartment, check it out. So we go to the apartment, we come inside, and all the cabinet doors in the kitchen were open, and there was stuff kind of knocked over, and all the lights in the house were on, and it was just really, really eerie, and you could tell they took off in a hurry. And we were just kind of like perplexed, and I got this bad feeling, because sometimes I consider myself, I don't want to say I'm insensitive, but I feel like when I go into certain places and there's some sort of bad energy, I feel like I need to leave the area. And so I was like, I need to go out of here. And I went outside into the parking lot by myself. And as I'm out in the parking lot, I look, and all of a sudden the street lights simultaneously start turning off and on, flickering all the way down the lines of the parking lights. And all of a sudden I look over to where their apartment was, and where the side of where their windows would be by the apartment, and I see what looks like the figure of a man walk out of the wall and go off into the woods. And it was just really, really crazy. And so I call my friends, I'm like, come out here quick, you know, there's something out here. And they come out here, and we didn't see anything. We checked over by the woods, but after that it kind of just settled down, and there was no more issues. But I just thought that that was a really weird encounter that we had, and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, when you recall sometimes these childhood memories, sometimes they get passed in the back of your mind. You find that there's a lot of creepy things that happen on a consistent basis that you just don't think about. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the stranger things that, some of the stranger things that I remember from childhood that had happened. And I have other stories and encounters, but definitely have to talk with you guys about that more. One of the things that's been going on right now is, and what's in the news, is everybody's talking about UFOs, and how they're releasing a report on UFOs and the findings on UFO, that the military's been researching it, and they need to release a report to Congress and say what this UFO phenomenon may or may not be. And they released a report, and basically the same old, we're not saying it's aliens, but it's not aliens. We don't really know. Sorry, maybe next time. You know, the same story that we've had for years and years and years. We knew we weren't going to find anything with that. So I don't know why we're looking in that general direction. My question is, why don't we talk about what's going on with alien abduction and all the abductions that have happened over the years that have been documented with tons of evidence. And when I look at one particular case of alien abduction that stands out to me, it's the Pascagoula abduction, which happened in Pascagoula, Mississippi, right by the Pascagoula River. There was two men who were fishing one night when they noticed this light in the sky, this oval-shaped blue light. And the light sort of appears over the water and then comes down and lands right in front of them. They see a door open, and out come two beings. And they said these beings basically didn't have skin. They had sort of this strange, almost like plastic looking skin. They didn't have a nose. It was like just like a point, almost like a thorn, and then 2 points for ears. And their hands looked like lobster claws. And these things weren't walking out of this spacecraft, they were floating out of the spacecraft. And then it's like they came up to them and they put them in a state of paralysis where they could see and hear everything and feel everything, but they couldn't move. And they also did something, they said, where it felt like it calmed them down and made them more relaxed. And then they were brought aboard the ship where they performed several experiments and then let them back down in the same location. And immediately these guys were terrified. They ran to the sheriff's office and they began to tell them this story about what had happened to them. The sheriff thinks immediately they're lying and has this idea to put them in the examination room or the questioning room. And he doesn't tell them that there's actually an audio recorder. And he thinks that during this time they're going to start talking about this hoax and how they're hoaxing them, and that they would admit to some sort of incriminating information during this time. So he has them sitting there for a couple hours, and this whole time he's recording them, all they're doing is talking about this encounter and how they were terrified, and they seem legitimately scared and going back and forth about what to do. And after these men had left the sheriff's office, the sheriff believed undoubtedly that something had happened to these men. He didn't know what, but he believed something had gone on. They did a polygraph test. They passed it. They had seen several psychologists and specialists who all said the men appeared to be sound in mind, and they legitimately believed these men's story, that they had experienced something. And these guys never went on to make a movie deal and have a huge amount of success. And they've seemed authentic. They've stuck to the same story. And it just seems like these guys are very believable. And there's a lot of credible evidence to support that these guys aren't making this up. And then the interesting thing is how they describe this extraterrestrial, because they could have went with the classic, image of a UFO, but this was something different that we hadn't seen before. And it makes me think that potentially they had encountered something that was extraterrestrial, something that wasn't of this earth or of this dimension, I should say. And, it's a very terrifying story when you look into it, but it's very believable. And I feel like there are many other cases of alien abduction where there is enough credible evidence. You have people that have taken polygraph tests, that have gone under cross-examination, that have done hypnosis and hypnosis regression therapy, where they've recounted their experiences. And when you have these multiple account of abductions, they all give the same testimony and collaborate with one another. And some of them you can tell, are way off, and you can tell maybe these are frauds and maybe this was a phony and they were looking for attention or fame. But some of these seem very legitimate and authentic. And I think this is where we need to be looking for UFOs. And if they are connected with extraterrestrials, then this is the direction we should be looking in. But, well, guys, I appreciate you for listening. This is Parahan. Peace out.